This is the Telegraph cycling podcast, supported by Jaguar. Today we are in Huy.
Hello, my name is Richard Moore. I'm with Lionel Birnie.
Hello, Richard.
And Daniel Friebe.
Hello.
Where are we, Lionel?
We are atop the Mur de Huy in Belgium. Famous climb from the Flèche Wallonne Classic and the conclusion of today's third stage of the Tour de France.
And what a stage it was. Are you going to give us a little news roundup, or
Yeah.
do you want to do that?
Yeah.
Let's do that. Hell yeah.
Why not? Well, Joaquim Rodriguez of Katusha, Spanish rider, won the stage. A bit of a duel with Chris Froome in the final 400 metres or so. Those two got away a little bit, put some time into everybody else. Froome now has the yellow jersey by 1 second from Tony Martin, who's becoming the unluckiest man of the Tour. He keeps missing out on the yellow jersey by just a couple of seconds yesterday, a second today. There was much talk this morning about the possibility of Tom Dumoulin possibly becoming the first Dutchman to take the yellow jersey in 26 years, I think that's right. He was one of a number of riders caught in two terrible crashes. 4 riders are now out of the race. Fabian Cancellara, the yellow jersey, went down. The race was neutralised. We'll talk all about that in a minute. The Big 4 GC, I know everybody, without exception, loves this new segment of the podcast, which we are going to carry through to Paris, come what may. Chris Froome is the leader out of the Big 4. Contador now 36 seconds back. Nibali 138 back, and Quintana 156 back. So that was stage 3 of the Tour de France.
Well, let's talk about the big talking point first, the crash. Now, well, the crashes. We were pretty surprised, to say the least, to see the race officially neutralised. We've seen the riders sort of self-neutralise before, I think most notably on the Tour into Spa, also in Belgium, very close to here. I mean, on these slippery sort of Ardennes descents, there were a number of crashes, one of which involved the Schleck brothers, and Fabian Cancellara on that occasion seemed to be calling the shots, and the stage was neutralised, but it wasn't an official ruling, although the organisers kind of endorsed it. On this occasion, the race was actually stopped, and we saw Christian Prudhomme leaning out the car, stopping the race. I'd never seen that before. Spoken to a number of people who've seen a lot more Tours de France than I have, and they've never seen it before. And I must say, my initial reaction was, this is terrible. This sets an awful precedent that, a big crash happens and the race is neutralised. As you keep saying, Daniel, crashing is incidents are part of the race. And if you set the precedent of stopping the race after a crash, and that's not done in the future for a favourite, there could be an outcry. Now, that was my initial reaction, which in these days of social media I instantly tweeted. Then some more facts emerged.
Did you hurt your knee on the table as you jerked there, or did you take time to consider your position?
No. I didn't really consider my position because I saw a tweet from Patrick Lefebvre who said this sets a terrible precedent as well. He seems to have some beef with the president of the race jury anyway.
There's a lot of beef with everyone. Patrick
Lefebvre. A lot of beef. So that was my initial reaction. Now, subsequently it became known that the medics, the doctors and the ambulances that followed the race were held up, and the race was effectively unprotected. That was very dangerous. That was genuinely dangerous, rather than just a dangerous precedent for the race. And of course, you do take that into account. Now, I think it's possible to hold the two positions, that it sets a bad precedent, and also that it was the correct decision. I think it's possible to hold those two positions. And in the circumstances, as Dave Brailsford said afterwards when we spoke to him and various others, it was the correct decision, and it has met with universal approval, certainly from the riders, and it's difficult to disagree with that. But Daniel, do you have any more thoughts? I think you got some comments from Christian Prudhomme himself, didn't you?
Yeah, he obviously stands by his decision. It wasn't his decision, we should stress. It was Thierry Gouvenou, who is the event director, competitions director of ASO, has taken over from Jean-Francois Pécheur, the long-serving competitions director in the last couple of years. And the president of the jury, Guy Dobelera, I think his name is, a Belgian gentleman, and they were sitting next to each other in the car, in the president's car, and not the same car as Prudhomme's. They took what was a mutual decision very quickly after the second crash, relayed it to Prudhomme, and yeah, as I say, he was quite happy with the decision they'd made and happy with the reaction of the riders.
The man in the front seat of that car, in the passenger seat, is Seb Piquet friend of the podcast, the voice of Race Radio. We did an interview with him last year about his role. We'll do another interview with him, I think, this year, probably for our new Kilometre Zero programme, and maybe a day in the life of Seb Piquet. Now, we spoke to him last year about the controversy there had been at the Giro d'Italia over the neutralisation, non-neutralisation, the confusion over one of the stages in the Giro. Daniel, you'll remember which descent it was, when Quintana was perhaps flouted the neutralisation.
Off the Stelvio.
Stelvio, of course. It was a day of terrible snow and awful weather and poor visibility. So that stage there was a lot of confusion about whether it was neutralised or not. And I think what Seb Piquet said about that last year was that the problem was that no official decision, there wasn't clarity, basically. There wasn't clarity between the organisers and the commissars. I think what we can say today, and I spoke to Seb Piquet after the stage today, was that there was clarity, and that's one of the reasons for having Gouvenou and the president of the race jury in the same car. There was a decision was made very quickly. It was a clear decision, and it was enforced with decisiveness and promptness. Lionel, you any thoughts?
Well, I spoke to Luca Guercilena of the Trek Racing team, the sports director of Fabian Cancellara, of course. Cancellara in the yellow jersey, one of those riders who went down, and my first thoughts about the crash that he was in was that it looked bad. I mean, it was a terrible looking crash. Actually, I think it was the one that William Bonnet was in that was the first one that looked particularly bad. And I asked him whether this did set a precedent, and he said, well, it has to be done on a case by case basis. It doesn't mean that they'll be neutralising the race. I mean, he didn't say willy-nilly, but I'll interpret it for him. English phrase, willy-nilly means...
Italian for willy-nilly, Daniel.
Daniel, any idea? No.
I think Chiro was going to join us today. Maybe we'll go and find Chiro in a second to add some levity.
Yeah, but crashes do happen. The severity of it was the reason. It was one of the reasons that so many riders needed medical treatment, and there's I don't say a limited amount of medical backup, but there is a finite amount of medical backup in terms of not just medical personnel but ambulances. And once they're all occupied and there's no coverage for the race, then it does present. What happens then if an even more serious accident happens further down the road, and there's absolutely no support backup to look after riders injured in that. So it's very easy, and I don't blame you, Richard, for your knee-jerk reaction, because watching the race on TV, I had the same thought. I thought this looks bad. We've got the cobbles tomorrow. Are we going to stop every time there's any kind of crash, or is there some kind of, if 10 riders are involved, or 20 riders are involved, or 30 riders are involved, is there a threshold where we're going to neutralise the race? But very individual circumstances required a very specific and individual response, and I think fair enough. And then they raced on. There, like any crash, there were people who got lucky and people who didn't get lucky. But as Daniel sort of said yesterday, that's one of the key elements of bike racing.
It sounds cold-hearted, to say that you hope that that's not what happens in the future. You hope that big crashes don't lead to neutralisations of the race. But as you say, Lionel, the circumstances this time were pretty specific.
And the Tour de France has 4 ambulances following it, which is a luxury that the Tour de France can afford. Not all races will have that luxury, but as it is there, the Tour de France really has a duty to use it and to get access to as many of the casualties as possible, I suppose. Yeah,
I mean, the crash it reminded me most of was 2009 on the road to Metz. There was absolute carnage that day. It was David Miller said it was the fastest crash he'd ever been involved in. Half the field came down. On that occasion, I'd be very surprised if the medics made it through the carnage to provide backup to the leaders.
However, Prudhomme was very keen to stress that the deciding factor here wasn't the gravity of the crashes, it was the combination of the two crashes. I'm not actually sure which crash was which.
No, I'm a bit confused by that as well.
No, they were on similar stretches of road, and but the one which cuts into the FDJ rider, William Bonnet, that was the first crash. The second crash was the one that Van Summeren and Cancellara and Simon Yates were in.
Really?
Yeah, according to the official communique médical there. Yeah. But talking about the damage done, there were a lot of riders with cuts and bruises. Michael Matthews looked in really terrible shape as he came over the line.
Daniel Tekla-Heimanot as well.
Right, yeah. I mean, Matthews would last over the line 24 minutes behind, I think. And 4 riders are out of the race today. You wouldn't be surprised, particularly with the cobbles tomorrow, there might be some more that wake up in the morning and are unable to continue. And I asked whether Cancellara would be able to continue tomorrow, and they said it was too early to say, but he definitely didn't look in a good mood as he got into the team car.
I wondered if he was slightly concussed, Cancellara. And we have an appointment tonight with the Trek Factory Racing team, so I hope that's still on. That's a bit selfish sounding, isn't it? I mainly hope that Cancellara is okay, but secondly, I hope that my meeting with their head mechanic is still on.
Well, without delving into an area that we can't really get into at this moment, it strikes me that this is the next sort of the sort of coming storm for cycling in a way. Concussion is a very big thing in rugby at the moment, and the game is being altered, and lots of rules are being put in place about how players who have suffered concussion can't then play for a certain amount of time. I can see that happening in cycling at some point, and riders who crash, hit their heads badly and are concussed. I mean, at the moment, it's at the discretion of the team doctors, and the riders themselves have the choice to carry on. But I can see in future this being an area that cycling has to adopt.
I think you'll be looking at the subject of crashes for one of our Kilometre Zero programmes coming up, Daniel. Our first Kilometre Zero was this morning, thanks to all who have listened and fed back. It'll be evolving, I think. We'll tackle different subjects as well as just being meanderings. We're going to tackle things like the role of the mechanics, the roles of domestiques, crashes. We've got all kinds of featurey type things planned for that, so do keep listening.
Yeah, tomorrow morning is a trip behind the scenes at the Village Depart, isn't it, Richard?
It is, yeah. Well, Thank you very much to Paul Scoynes for his terrific work in producing that. Jury of Commissars had a very busy day today, as well as making important decisions on the hoof. They dished out quite a few Swiss franc fines to likes Peter Kenyuk and Nicholas Roach for irregular feeding. Ian Stannard as well, another Team Sky rider, for what's that for, Daniel, exactly?
That is a sticky bottle.
A sticky bottle, of course, bidon collé. And my favourite is always the pour comportement incorrect en public, in brackets. That's TJ Van Garderen and Simon Yates peeing in public. Nasty. A busy day for them. Before we talk about the race, the stage itself.
What, for the urinators in public? Or
yeah, just for commissars, But I mean, that's funny. They must have been doing it in a built-up area, I would imagine, because urinating outside the road is a bit of a ritual on the tour. I guess they maybe didn't pick their spots very wisely. Good ride by Simon Yates today, though. He was 8th on the stage. Terrific. Before we talk about the actual stage, let's hear from Chris Froome, the new yellow jersey, and his boss at Team Sky, Dave Brailsford.
I think, like the same way we've approached these other few days, first few days, just to almost completely forget that we're in this commanding position at the moment, and just start from zero every single one of these days until we get to the mountains, and just say, listen, we're going to try and race each stage the best we can. Not necessarily thinking it's an extra pressure or an extra burden being in yellow. Just try and race the best we can each of these first 9 days until we get to the mountains and take it from there.
But ultimately, I think from our point of view, Christian Prudhomme made the right call. You've got to take each situation individually. Obviously all the ambulances, all the medical support vehicles were stranded. So the rest of the group weren't going to be protected. It was pretty obvious straight away that's what he's doing.
Were you told that though?
The rules. It was obvious, really. I think. But when watching on telly, we knew straight away that Tim and I were talking. And you're right. There's no. That's what the reason will be. But I guess on the road when you're racing and you've got a lot of emotion and there was a bit of confusion, but I supported the decision, and that's that.
You ever seen that before though, Dave?
No, but I don't think you've got to be careful. I think ultimately if we just go right, if you do this here, then when somebody crashes tomorrow, you're going to stop the race again. He said no. Life is about taking a set of rules and applying them to a given circumstance. I'm all for that, and I think what I don't like is when people apply rules rigidly when it's quite obvious it doesn't fit. As we saw maybe elsewhere in the sport not so long ago. I'm all for this type of decision making and application of the rules.
Chris is going to be in yellow.
Good. Perfect tomorrow, yeah. I'd like to say it was planned, but that'd be stretching it a bit too much. Car number 1 on the cobbles. Couldn't want for anything better, could you really? It's only for tomorrow, isn't it? And then we'll see where we go from there.
Would it be you mentioned it's ideal scenario for tomorrow, but it wouldn't be a disaster to lose the jersey tomorrow, would it?
Not at all, no. I don't think, at this early stage, I don't think we'd be we're not particularly kind of, it's great to have a yellow jersey again in the team, there's no doubt about that, and you've got to respect that, and it's great to have a yellow jersey whenever you get the opportunity, and we'll take that with both hands and respect that. On the other hand, from an overall point of view, I think that, it's a very, very long way to go. And it would be a big ask to try and protect that jersey all the way from now to the end.
Is Chris as good as he was in 2013, do you think? Are you observing an athlete in the same sort of shape?
We've come at it differently, as we've been saying. We've tried to come at it from a point of view of thinking about the third week, and in so doing, I think you've got to be, to a certain extent, there's a degree of conservatism required to make sure that plan works. Now, in reality, with a human body, you don't really know whether you're going to come up in the third week or what's going to happen, but that's the plan. So I think in terms of comparing to how he was in 2013, he came in absolutely flying. He went in, he flew, he got the time on the bank and he hung on. Whereas this approach is, the idea is to come at it slightly differently.
Vice-champion du monde, la victoire pour Rodriguez, qui remporte la 3e étape du Tour de France ici au Mur de Huy.
You are listening to the Telegraph Cycling Podcast, supported by Jaguar, with Richard Moore, Lionel, Birnie and Daniel Friebe.
We heard there from a very happy Chris Froome and Dave Brailsford, who were pleased as punch to take the yellow jersey on the eve of the cobble stage and get first in the convoy, which means that if any of the riders from Team Sky have a problem, they should be guaranteed prompt service. But I think they'd like to lose the jersey tomorrow. Before we go on to that, what did you make, Daniel, of the race-winning sort of situation? It all came down, as Flesh Wallone often does, to the Mur de Huy, and Joaquim Rodriguez was a favourite for a lot of people, I guess. He attacked, and Froome went with him and held on for the stage, and as Lionel said earlier, gained some time on his overall rivals.
He was. I mean, the first thing to say is Prudhomme was a bit of a surprise winner in the sense that, okay, he's got great pedigree on this climb, but I had a text message from my flatmate at the Home of Cycling, Robert Hatch, Eurosport commentator this morning, assuring me that Prudhomme was battered and bruised and had no chance today on the Mur de Huy, so I'd written him off. And he's someone who's approaching the twilight of his career. We've thought that this could be his last Tour de France, and certainly the last Tour de France in which he has any kind of say in the big stages. So it was quite a surprise to see him winning, and Froome himself looked very explosive, didn't he? Very much more explosive than the other Cuatro Galácticos.
Contador was on his wheel about 500 metres to go and lost it, and you don't. This is a climb that you would have thought suited Contador more than Froome.
Well, you would have done, and again in this tour where every day just chipping away at your rivals is going to build up and add up over the 3 weeks. Chris Froome has struck a big blow to Nibali, Contador and Quintana, and Contador of the three, he's had the shocker really today.
Yeah, he has, and obviously you can't legislate against superior form and superior ability, but I think the big danger for all of the main contenders is to get too downcast if they lose even a minute, 2 minutes, because I think there are probably 14-15 stages in this Tour de France where big time gaps could occur, which is certainly a big change on the usual Tours de France we see. Often there are 10 stages, maybe 8 mountain stages, a couple of time trials where you could lose or gain time. Who's to say that the guys who've gained 4 minutes over the last 2 days couldn't lose 4 minutes again over the next 2 days? Obviously, though, Froome has the best form of all of them. I thought Nibali today, I mentioned Rob Hatch's ability as a tipster. Mine was not particularly distinguished today either, because I thought Nibali was going to win and be more explosive than he actually was on the Mur de Huy. He climbed fairly well, but he didn't have that punch to go with Froome, did he, around the last bend and when they were sort of zeroing in on that closing sort of 300 metres.
I don't worry about Alberto Contador, Daniel. I don't think he'll be too downhearted. I mean, if any of them is robust mentally and strong psychologically, is Alberto Contador. And what I think is that even if he does lose lots of time, he's still going to have a huge impact on this race. He's not going to give up. He's going to have a go to the end. I think Quintana is a guy who, can afford to, lose these seconds at this stage and come good in the third week. We heard from Dave Brailsford earlier talking a little bit about Froome's form and wondering. I think the great mystery for them is how he will be in the third week, because the approach this year has been different to what it was in 2013. But at the moment, he looks in great shape.
Well, I was just going to say about watching the climb in a Grand Tour context rather than Flèche Wallonne, how much more interesting it was, and interest sustained once the moment that Rodriguez was obviously going to win. If that was Flèche Wallonne, you kind of go, oh right, well he's won, and then the rest just troop over the line. But there was a lot more interest and intrigue just seeing where everybody was in relation to each other, and it was a interesting finish, and particularly coming over the penultimate climb, the Côte de Cherave. That added a different dimension as well, and it was interesting to see that Sky used Richie Porte there, and Tinkoff Saxo had Rafael Majka up at the front, and then they saved Geraint Thomas for like the last man for Froome, and that was a bit of a tweak that perhaps people wouldn't have anticipated. But Brailsford did say that they would be looking to use their super domestiques a little bit more creatively than perhaps the obvious.
Yeah, he did say that actually as well. We didn't hear him say that, but he talked about using Nicolas Roche much earlier than usual, much earlier than he would usually use him. Sorry, we're being waved at there by an official-looking person, and I realised it was Sir Gary Verity. Anyway,
can't shake him off, can we? Every single night in his yellow chinos. We thought we got rid of him last year.
Sir Gary Truth.
Is he not off to enjoy Eddie Merckx's wine collection now?
He is. We met him last night, and he said there's a big bash for Eddie Merckx tonight at his house with his wine collection of 100,000 bottles.
Yeah, I have to say,
I think Merckx will give them Hardy's Merlot.
I have to say, seeing Merckx and Eno within a few metres of each other in the finish straight around about 40 minutes after the finish, a little frisson of excitement there. There's real kind of to see them.
How do you think they felt when they came up to you and said, "Where are we, Lionel?"
I get that every day when I see Chiro interviewing Pippo Pozzato.
You certainly do, Daniel. Any other business from today's stage before we move on to the really important business of Pedlar de Charme?
Yes, I mean, we're talking about guys in form, very much in form. TJ Van Garderen has not put a foot wrong so far, has he?
Tony Galopin, my tip yesterday, rode extremely well today.
Yes, another big loser today was Thibaut Pinot, who unfortunately all of the fears and the anxieties about his ability in terms of placement, racecraft, on difficult, gnarly, complicated stages like today, they came to the fore really, and he lost contact over the penultimate climb, and he struggled up the Mur de Huy and has lost another minute and a half today. But I don't think that's a disaster for him. No. As long as he keeps his head together, keeps his morale high, he knows there are endless opportunities in this Tour de France, and he can remedy the losses that he's suffered in the last 2 days.
Interesting though, I spoke to Gilles Simon after the stage of L'Equipe, who'd been speaking to Pinot and some of the people in his team, and he said he was spooked by the crash, and particularly seeing his teammate William Bonney go down so heavily. He said he lost confidence, and this has been a problem with him in the past, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, on the bright side, there's a simple, very straightforward stage coming tomorrow, isn't there? So the lack of confidence.
He rode well over the cobbles last year, didn't he?
He did, and he's more powerful than many people give him credit for on the flat. So he's got all the credentials of a reasonable rider over pavé, but he seemed very downbeat at the finish. Said he had nothing left over the penultimate climb, so not particularly good news.
And now, Le Pédaleur de Charme, supported by British Eurosport.
Yes, it's time for Pedlar de Charme again. This is really catching fire, this competition. It presented the T-shirt to Jan Barta this morning in Antwerp, and he seemed as pleased as punch, as well as like Brailsford was earlier, with that, and he held it up gamely for the cameras. And he almost seemed to be thinking that he was out to defend the jersey, because he went on the attack again today. And somebody suggested on Twitter that he might be going for the old pose, the Bernardino washing line pose with a
was
series
a bit
of
suspicious when Bora Argon came to the front at kilometre 0, wasn't it?
What is,
well, they've got to go for something, haven't they?
what is so innovative about the Pedaleur de Charme jersey is that it changes colour every day. Daniel Tekla-Heimer wore a white one.
It's not actually going to change colour every day.
Not every day, but some days. And Jan Barter got a burgundy one.
One of the new criteria for it is that you've got to be not tiny, because most of the t-shirts we've got are medium. We've got a few small ones all that we're saving for the mountains.
We might be able to make it change colour if we use the wrong washing powder.
We're looking for slightly bigger riders. No, and we're not at all. We're not compromising in any way in selecting riders. And there were a lot of nominations today. A lot of nominations for riders who fell. Now, we've taken a sort of editorial decision not to give it to a rider who's fallen, because often you find the following morning they're not in the best mood, understandably, and they don't really like to maybe... It might look a bit disrespectful.
Is piss take the word you're looking for?
Yeah, maybe. I think it might not go down that well. So I'm not in favour of giving it to one of the fallen.
No, and I mean the Pedaleur de Charme is not a joke competition. It is a deadly serious competition.
Treat it with some respect the jersey, man. Today's Pedaleur de Charme. We did decide on somebody. Who was it? I've forgotten now.
Well, I think we were going to go for Nathan Haas of Cannondale Garmin, because he was photographed by our friend of the podcast, photographer Simon Gill. He was photographed going around the bend on the...
Going around the bend?
Going around the bend on the Mur de Huy, pulling a wheelie. So we tweeted a picture of that, figured that that's the most charming bit of pedalling we've seen today. So Nathan Haas.
Congratulations, Nathan. We will get a picture of Nathan Haas with the Pedaleur de Charme t-shirt. Keep your nominations coming in. Hashtag Pedaleur.
Hashtag.
Hashtag. Brilliant. That's really good.
Supreme form we're on this evening.
It's like hashtag podcar. Also, if you happen to see our beautiful Jaguar cruising around Belgium or France in the next 2.5 weeks, take a picture and tweet it. It's pretty obvious to spot. We've got big transfers on it that say The Cycling Podcast. So tweet a picture of the photo if you tweet a picture of the car if you see it. Somebody actually tweeted that they'd seen it parked outside my house in Tooting last week, but that wouldn't have counted had he taken a picture. That would just been a bit weird. Anyway, any other business today?
Tomorrow stage.
Oh yeah,
it's important.
Yeah, tell us about it.
Well, we're going over the cobbles again, like last year.
And the cobbles are harder, but the weather should be better.
There's going to be a headwind. That's not great for the spectacle.
No.
Which the riders will probably be quite pleased about. Most of them will probably be quite pleased about. RS Darn are going to tear it up again. They've done similar preparation as last year. They've reccoed the course.
Lionel, what are your thoughts on the cobbles?
The big thing is the race for the yellow jersey, because it is incredibly tight. Tony Martin, a second back, you've got to figure he's going to do reasonably well. I earwigged him as he came back to the Ethics Quick Step bus at the top of the Mur de Huy, and he was asked whether he and Cavendish had words after the slight farrago over the yellow jersey the previous day, and he said yes, they had words, and it's all forgiven and forgotten, and a very difficult situation on the road to take into account all of the different permutations. Tomorrow it's very clear. Tony Martin, 1 second back, he has got the best chance he's going to have to take that yellow jersey, and the people lining up behind him, I would suggest, would be Greg Van Avermaet in 5th. He's 28 seconds off Chris Froome. Peter Sagan, who's 6th, he's 31 seconds off, and then you've got Geraint Thomas and Stibar, cobbled kind of specialists. So it's a real race within a race, and then you've got to work out. Chris Froome's going to need Geraint Thomas as part of that protection unit. Luke Rowe, Ian Stannard, they're very strong there.
Geraint Thomas is not going to finish a minute up the road ahead of Chris Froome, is he? So I think we can probably rule him out. I think he had a reasonable chance today, but it wasn't to be.
I'm glad Tony Martin said that he had words with Mark Cavendish, because he did, that's the truth. Cavendish told him, he said Martin should know that he would never flick him, he would never...
Can you do this in Cavendish's voice?
I was about to, but I didn't. Martin, I was quite dubious about Martin's chances today of taking the yellow jersey on the Mur de Huy. However, Brian Holm, the Ethics Quick Step director, yesterday in the finale, this much talked about now finale at the end of stage 2, was screaming at Tony Martin to stop pulling on the front of that group, to save energy for today at the Mur de Huy, because he couldn't take the yellow jersey. It wasn't to be, so he was 1 second down. There are a lot of people at Essex Quickstep who have always felt that Tony Martin would make an excellent rider on the cobbles. However, he doesn't really like fighting for position. He doesn't like the rough and tumble of it. But tomorrow he's going to have to get involved in all of that, isn't he, if he wants to take the yellow jersey. Another name, Napalm, you didn't mention, Tony Galopin, who I thought rode superbly today, has not ridden Flèchewell on many occasions. He's ridden it twice. Today he was, where did he finish in the end? He was certainly one of the strongest guys. Looked at one stage as though he would challenge Froome and Perito for the stage win.
Well, he was with them, wasn't he? He was fifth in the end.
He was fifth in the end. And he said this evening that he actually enjoys the cobbles very much. He's had a reasonable amount of experience in them as well. He was a rider who for quite a long time didn't really know what he was, and consequently he rode quite a lot of the races in Belgium and northern France. So he's another one to look out for tomorrow. He is only, how many seconds, Napalm, behind Chris Froome on GC? He's 26.
Michał Kwiatkowski, disappointing today, I thought. I mean, he was up there near the front, did a lot of work yesterday. Did he pay for that today?
Well, the consensus about Kwiatkowski was that he didn't come into this tour in particularly great form.
He said that himself, really.
Yeah, in particularly great form, and there's a sense that he's been a little bit stressed by these contract negotiations that are ongoing with Quickstep and we believe Team Sky, and the pressure of being the world champion that he's had to live with now for the last several months has taken its toll, I'm led to believe, and he's not feeling particularly fresh or sprightly in this Tour de France.
The other big question about tomorrow is whether Astana try and do what they did last year, which is really take the race on. They've got Lars Bohm, of course, won the cobbled stage.
Lars Bohm, who had another test today, didn't he, for his cortisol levels, and I think we're finding that out tonight.
And he also got a bit of a pasting in the columns of the Dutch newspaper Algemeen Dagblad. They said that they sort of criticised Boom for dismissing the whole cortisol affair as a storm in a teacup, and the column concluded with the sentence, well, Lars Boom's whole career has been a bit of a storm in a teacup, not really quite what it was cracked up to be, and he obviously took great exception to this.
Fair comment, maybe. I mean, he's a talented rider whose only major success really has been winning that stage of the Tour de France last year. We should probably wrap this up, guys, because we don't want to give people too much to listen to. We've got Kilometre Zero going out every morning around about 10 a.m. British time, and we've got this evening show going out every night, which wraps up the day's racing. So we'll leave you in a field in Huy and head off towards Liège and via the Trek Hotel, I think. Daniel, thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thank you to you too. It's been emotional.
Lionel, thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
During the Tour de France, listen twice a day to the Telegraph cycling podcast supported by Jaguar. There is all the latest interviews and analysis from every stage in the evening show. And in the morning, Monday to Friday, Kilometre Zero will take you inside the tour in the company of the podcast team Richard Moore, Daniel Friebe and Lionel Birnie.